So just some basic bullet points, what to look for, so you can identify an open versus a competitor's cartridge. It seems like everybody and their mom's using the same thing today. They all come from the same factories in China. So the only thing that really sets this apart visually would be the laser inscribed OPEN logo on the same with the pen. They're all black with a little stylus tip on there, or white, and they say OPEN on it. So if somebody brings it in and says, hey, I've got an issue with this, I'd like to swap it out, just make sure you look for the OPEN logo, make sure that it's one of ours, in fact, and not our competitors. And then sometimes, somebody will be dishonest and try to refill a cartridge that they've already used, right? So the telltale sign is if that oil is not liquid. Ours is always liquid when we use PEG. So it's got that nice thin viscosity, slides back and forth. If it's in there, it's solidified, that's something else. If it's really dark in color, if it has a different odor, if it smells like mint or something like that, we don't add any flavorings or anything to ours. So that's usually a good way to be able to tell. We've got some new packaging coming out. Actually, this next week. Do you have any packaging put together yet?
I don't think so.
Well, there's some pictures up on our Facebook and our Instagram of new packaging. It's still going to be purple, orange, and green for the Sativa Hybrid. But it's just a little prettier. We had to change up a few things for 502. Not to mention we've got Mopens down in Oregon now, and they had different requirements. It was that flashy, foil packaging longer, so we just changed it all the way across the board. And then there's a few competitors out there who like to make their slow as much like us as possible. So we have to try and set it apart and make sure that it's a little different. Recently we've been dealing with a cartridge issue that came from China. The factory there, I guess it was a mold that forms the plastic that the cartridge is made out of, and they were just leaking like a sieve. You'd take a rip on it, and that oil would go straight from the cartridge into the vapor chamber and then up in your mouth. We took an extra precautionary measure so that these wouldn't end up in a retailer's hand and then a patient's hand. And we were filling them, letting them sit overnight. If they leaked, we'd take the oil back out of it and then put it into a new cartridge, let that sit overnight. And this kind of slowed things down, but we wanted to make sure that as few of these faulty cartridges were getting on the market. We're starting to see our competitors having the same issue now, just because, like I said, they all come from the same factory. I'm not sure what they're doing, but if you've noticed that sort of thing happen, swap it out immediately, even if it's leaking before it ends up in somebody's hands. Set it aside, we'll replace it. We guarantee this product is going to find it 100%. We also have a new cartridge that's going to be making its way on shelves in the next few weeks. It looks different. It's a different construction. It feels differently. It doesn't have that little, when you pull the mouthpiece off, it's got that little blue nipple underneath it. That's how they're filled these days. So that's not going to be there anymore. So hopefully they won't leak as much. That's another thing. We use Fiznar, which is basically a pneumatic syringe. It's pressurized, and we can measure the exact amount of oil that's going into each one of these cartridges. So if somebody says, hey, this one looks different, and this one doesn't have as much in it, it's like, I watch the folks in the lab fill these things, and they are spot on every time. They calibrate it like every 25 cartridges or so. They're filling them up, making sure the exact amount's in there. Sometimes the wick tends to absorb a little bit, and maybe you'll see a slight variation from one to another, but they're spot on, and that's actually how they were having to extract the oil. Back out of those faulty cartridges, they just turned it on a vacuum and suck it back out again. But that's one of the steps that we take here in Washington to make sure that we're giving a consistent product to everybody at the same time. So Canatest, that's the name that you see on the back whenever you're looking at one of these cartridges. You're going to have test results on there. It's going to say what different cannabinoids are. Canatest is a company that Derek's been running for how many years now? 4. And they're in how many countries?
6.
Okay. So these guys they know what they're doing. We have competitors out there. I think the biggest name in the game in the Seattle area is probably Analytical. But we test everything because we want people to know what's inside of it. We are a firm believer in what's inside that counts. Canatest went and tested the High Times Cannabis Cups in Amsterdam, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. Derek just got back from Spain. He's been over there working with guys in a group called Copycat, helping them set up Open Vape in Europe and helping them set up testing facilities over there as well, in France and Italy as well.
Czech Republic and Spain.
It's all very exciting for us, to see that people across the planet are trying this product. And cannabis is just becoming more and more, open. People are being, less shy about it. You see your mom and her friends are doing it now. It's like, times are changing. And this is a really exciting place for us all to be working. Again, we really appreciate how you guys have been our biggest leader in sales since day one, essentially. I've been with Open Vape since
Officially.
January officially. I got on board, I met Derek in Hamilton. I used to manage a restaurant, and they come in all the time, and I was really interested in what they were doing, and we started working together, and they brought me on board, and it's been probably one of the funnest things I've ever done in my entire life. I love it. Every day I get to go out on the road, I get to meet you guys, I get to sell this fantastic product, and I really enjoy what I do. One of these questions that I get a lot though is what is PEG 400? And so that's what this other sheet over here is. Polyethylene glycol. It's a cutting agent that we use because when we put straight oil in these cartridges, it usually tends to solidify. It requires a hotter battery. It just doesn't burn as well. Like if you do happen to get a lot of it to burn, the upper half of the cartridge, the oil will sit up there at the top, and it doesn't come back down, so you don't get to use everything that's inside of it. There's different variations of polyethylene glycol. We use PEG 400. It's in infant inhalers. It's in a million different medical applications. So as far as the research that we've seen, we think that it's perfectly safe, and we want to use it, and we're going to continue to use it. And if people have any kind of concerns about it, we want to be able to educate them on it. Because a lot of people think, oh, that sounds like ethylene glycol. And say, well, that's a very different thing. It's something that different names. It may sound similar, but it's really 100% different, 180 degrees the opposite direction.
So what is ethylene glycol?
Ethylene glycol is another chemical altogether.
Is it a cutting agent?
No, like I said, they use it in things like antifreeze. So it's a different chemical compound completely. This is polyethylene glycol is this fluid that your body won't absorb. It helps you inhale or ingest vaporized things. So like I said, for instance, they put it in infant inhalers. So it just gets that medicine into your system, and you don't absorb the polyethylene. It's just
Well, I'll tell you, these guys, they'll probably back me up on this.
When you
There's
say
a
you
lot of
don't
concern.
absorb it, so what is it doing? Because you
it just
inhale
passes.
It
Oh.
passes through. They use it prior to colonoscopy procedures. They'll usually have you drink 2 quarts, so a half a gallon, so the polyethylene glycol, which you'd have to smoke about 1,000 to 2,000 cartridges to even come close to a single colonoscopy procedure, and the amount of PEG consumption. So it's a cleanser essentially, non-inert carrier, passes right through your system.
What was your question?
So when you breathe it in,
Mm.
how does it pass through?
Yeah.
You're not ingesting it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, how
It's
does
basically
it-
like
does-
swallowing it. You inhale it, and
But I
it's going to pass right through your system. It's not going to bond to anything. So as we understand, they haven't done the exact science on it. It more or less falls out of your lungs, just like if you swallow in the wrong tube, you feel it get in your lungs. And
But if you swallow it, you're going to digest it. If you inhale it, it's going into your
Your
bloodstream.
respiratory.
exactly.
So that's
But it
my
can't
main
be
concern,
absorbed
is that's
into your
plastic
bloodstream.
really much.
So they're just.
Did you say it can't?
Does it just collect in your respiratory system then?
That's what we were wondering too when we saw one paper that we're trying to look at it through the e-cigarettes, and they basically said no.
So there's just not enough research into it.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
So I have a question. Why, for the price that we're paying for your product, should we continue to pay what we pay for your product while you get a quarter, like you get half the amount, you're doing half and half, you've got a 0.5 gram, whatever, it's like 500 milligrams, right?
Mm-hmm.
Half of which is the polyethylene glycol, half of which is the actual CO2 oil. For $10 more, I can buy your competitor's product, which is 100% CO2, no cutting agent, double the medicine.
And the quality?
It's
Phenomenal.
pure CO2 oil. You could dab it. It's
Yeah.
like it's 100% dabbable straight out of the cartridge.
Quality and taste. Quality
It
and
tastes like a
effect.
million times better
It
than
just tastes
yours.
like honey.
Tastes
It
like
tastes
flour.
Like yeah.
It tastes like whatever flour you're smoking. Like so, when you hit it and you hit Tahoe OG, it tastes like Tahoe OG.
It's just really hard to sell a product where you're like, well, this has half the amount of the product that this is, and you're paying a third of the amount more for double the product.
Do you trust 100% that it's actually CO2 oil and
I
not
have
VHO?
dabbed. I have.
Dabbed it.
I myself,
And
am
they're
honest.
tested.
I've dabbed it myself. I've tried it. It's thick. It's rich. I mean, there's a couple of them out there.
And it's true, they do require a hotter, stronger battery,
Yeah.
and they are a little bit thicker, so
So I
they're
found-
not as viscous, but I mean,
Right.
when it
So-
comes down to, I mean, especially we're in the medical side
of your product on the shelf. Explain to me why I should purchase yours over that product and how our bartenders can explain that to our.
No. Our
Okay.
biggest points are the quality control that goes into the testing, basically the processing that we have with our trim, doing the testing prior to the extraction, during the extraction, after the extraction, for making sure the quality is there, and doing the mold test prior to everything as well. The machinery, very expensive, very time-consuming, labor-intensive process to produce the O-Pen in a large quantity. I know a lot of our competitors are doing similar products, but they're doing it in a much smaller quantity, so a lot less labor-intensive, and therefore a lot less that goes into the capital.
And what about the in-house testing dilemma with the whole like conflict of interest with doing in-house testing on your own product?
So basically, we have different companies. So we've sold Sound CO2. What we sell is like an in-house R&D testing kit, so you can do all of your own development for testing. Quick turnaround, quick testing to get your results, and you can adjust your recipes accordingly right there on the spot, rather than waiting for the time and the opportunity cost of sending it out to the lab. And as far as the final product test, yes, we trust Canatest. They're 100% transparent in the results that we put on there. Yes, it could be considered a conflict of interest with the shared ownership. However, I think there's enough good labs, professional labs in the space that can double check us and basically call us out if we really were changing the results.
Fair enough.
And COM502 will be required to use a third-party lab
Exactly.
for our final packaging.
Right.
Right. We're gonna soon require everybody that we have within our company to start using Steep Hill Labs testing as well.
Yep.
Everything needs to be batch tested, and we're gonna start doing that come the next 2 months or so. So is that something you guys would be interested in doing?
Steep Hill, possibly, if I may make a suggestion, I would actually consider using the workshop. They've also recently come from California. We're in collaboration with them. We've been working back and forth, just doing tests, blind tests, development projects for a year or so. They are, as far as I'm concerned, the most professional lab in the space. They are real scientists. Dr. Raber participates in the International Cannabinoid Research Society. I've traveled with him from multiple countries, along with other professionals as far back as Raphael Meshulam, the man who discovered THC in the 60s in Israel. These people are very hardcore scientists. They are on the forefront of all of the research, the terpene testing, way beyond Steep Hill. I'm not going to slander Steep Hill, but they have nowhere near the same sort of caliber that Workshop does. So before you make a decision like that, I would suggest you look a little bit more into some of the other competitors.
Do you see you guys switching from your testing facility to the workshop?
Yes, we
actually?
will be using the Workshop, 100%.
Wonderful. Nice.
What do you think it'll do to your vendors' prices to require them to test?
If they want to be in our shop, they have to get it tested through Steep Hill. If they believe their product is good enough and they want it to be consistently on the shelf, there's no reason for them not to.
Do you expect them to eat the cost of that?
Harborside does it. Why can't we?
I'm just asking.
Yes, we do. Honestly, it's one of those things like if you are going to be a legitimate company and if you want to be in the top cooperative in Washington State and you want to be online, we want everybody to be on the same board. We don't want that conflict of interest. Well, I got it tested here, we got it tested there. And we just want to eliminate all of that. We want one consistent testing facility. They're the ones we're choosing to go with, and so it's just going to be a requirement.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, the problem is just like you're saying is people can go and get stuff tested and they can all be reputable labs. But if they're not calibrated to the exact same standard for any number of reasons, we've got several different examples of flour in our shop that they have test results on them posted, but they're not from the same lab. So it's tough because when a patient comes in and says, well, which one's the strongest? I can say, well, according to what's written here, this strain.
Yeah,
But do I necessarily agree with that? That's a little different. And so it's tough because, I think that is something that needs to ultimately happen is to really be able to compare apples to apples. It's all got to be standard.
You're preaching to the choir for this. I mean, we've
For
been
sure.
working
Yeah, as far as
for 4 years to
why
prove
Steve
that
Bill,
ours-
that
yeah,
wasn't
no,
a decision that I made.
Well, and because now that we have recreational and medicinal, like if we're gonna be medicinal, we want to be medicinal. We want to have the microbial readouts. We want to have the pesticide readouts. We want to have, everything. Because at least personally for me, I want it as medical as it gets. These people have cancer. Like I don't want to give somebody something that could potentially be taking days off of their life that they already don't have.
You totally, like our company, that is the whole basis of our company is founded behind that. I have MS, which is why I started in the cannabis field. It's our number one priority is patient health and patient safety. So we've been working on testing for years now, and we totally agree that all the test labs need to be using the same standards. So
That's one of the nice things about 502 is they're forcing more or less a ring test, so everybody's going to have to pass that third-party certification to even be a lab in the space. So everybody will be within a 1% margin of error
We're
of
gonna
each
see a
other
lot
in
of
order to
people
even
fall for
operate.
it.
oh, absolutely,
Yep.
absolutely.
It'll weed them out, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, no, agreed. Totally.
Yep.
Completely.
And Canatest, we are actually staying out of the 502 market. We're focusing more on the international market right now and our database development. We don't necessarily see the need to do the day-to-day. We like the workshop and are basically supporting them in their day-to-day. And we sell equipment and training to people like Sound CO2 so they can save 2/3 of the cost in the testing process and the development and R&D inside their lab. So we're not even worried about competing in the 502 space. For sure. Leave that 100% to Sound CO2.
The test results on the back of the cartridges, how do those work? Like, are those tested with the glycol in it or
Yes.
without it?
Yep, 100% with the glycol.
Okay.
So, and that's how we develop it. We do all the testing prior to, and then we have the recipe so that once we've done our base test on the crude oil, we can cut it with PEG to whatever percent THC we want, depending on the initial start.
And that's why we've been trying to keep it consistently.
Yeah, so that's why it's always like
40%.
never like really above 45 or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah, sometimes in our cartridges there's more than half oil.
Mm.
It's not always a 50-50 split because we'll never put one out that ends up at like 31% or something.
Yeah,
like
for
that.
sure.
We'll mix it up higher
For
because
sure.
we try to provide value. And I totally understand all the medical stuff, and at the end of the day, this is all medical. As far as I know, we're all for-profit companies, and so that's a consideration to part of it. Our marketing and our brand name really does sell fairly well. As far as I know, we still sell pretty well over most of our competitors. I'm not arguing with you that for the medical value, some of the brands are a better dollar for cannabinoid value.
And for the medical value, one of the other reasons that we do mix it with PEG, so our scientist Arno Hoskamp, Bedrocan scientist, one of the leading experts in cannabinoid analysis out of the Netherlands, he basically did a test where they did the bioavailability of THC coming from a volcano, coming from a joint, and coming from, what did they do? Oh, just edibles, essentially. I think they use olive oil and butter. And they essentially tested everything. So when they started with the joint, say you have a 200 or a 20% flower, right? 200 milligrams of THC per gram in that flower. Roll that entire thing into a joint. You have to start with the 200 milligram joint. When you light it, while you're smoking it, 30% they were able to measure loss of THC just in the slipstream smoke that burns off while you're smoking. 5% of THC is left in the bud, in the butt, just like a cigarette butt. And then every time you inhale, at 10-second holding your inhalation, every lung pretty much maxes out at about 45% of whatever you inhale. So every time you're really, like a joint, you're only getting about 5 to maybe 15% efficiency on that joint. When they did the volcano, they came up with about 45 to 55% bioavailability of THC on that conversion. When you have an edible, it's upwards of 90 to 99% conversion. That's one of the differences in the effect. You know, we tell people, hey, it's a 1 Percocet versus 20 Percocet when you go from smoking a joint to eating an edible, and that's why you have so many people with the experience of overdoses. And so one of the other reasons when we put it PEG in our cartridges, it actually, with only a 45% absorption of everything you inhale, the guys that are selling, oh, it's a pure cartridge, it's 40, you know, it's 100% oil, it ends up still being cut in half every time they're smoking it. So actually, with the PEG, the cartridge does go through quicker in hits, less oil, but less waste.
For sure.
So what is the bioabsorption on the Opane cartridge?
It should be about 50 to 55%. We actually built a machine for Incanitest Lab where we can hook the cartridge up to it, and we're actually talked about that today, adding it to our quality control check so we can actually pull the cartridge clean without somebody actually hitting it. We can give it pressure and make sure it's not going to leak after you take that first hit, because usually we let it sit and sometimes it does leak and we can pull it right out. Other times it hits the shelf and it doesn't leak until somebody takes that first draw. And of course we don't want somebody sitting in our laboratory just hitting every single person. Here you go. Trust me, he's clean. We swabbed his mouth with ethanol every time, I promise. So we basically say, oh, no, we can take this machine, it's a pump, put the cartridge into it, pull it out, and we filter the smoke through, or the vaporizer, through our testing solvent. And again, we had the data from Arno's science in the Netherlands that said about how much we lose in the pole. And then we take that solvent that we pass the vapor through and we test it in our machine. And we basically found that each draw is about 1 milligram of THC that you're going to pull. And that's how we say you're at 300 to 350 hits. It worked perfectly with our 150 milligrams of THC that's usually in there. So, and it's just another quality control that we work towards.
Well, yeah, I have a couple of easier questions than our house reporter over here.
All good.
So speaking of for-profit, would you guys ever consider sponsoring a contest for salespeople?
Yeah,
A prize or
absolutely.
something like that?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. I'd be really interested in that too.
I bet you would.
We've had brief discussions with BJ.
I would be
but we
interested in
haven't
that as
finalized.
well.
Yeah, I'm sure.
We've definitely talked to BJ about it.
Okay.
We'll make that happen by the end of the year.
Awesome. By the end of the year,
Well, I'm giving ourselves.
All the things will.
I don't want to
Managing
promise something
expectations,
that I
right?
can't. Yeah, I'm managing expectations.
Alright.
It'll happen this year. For
I'll keep
sure.
following up with you guys.
Yeah, no, that'll make it go faster. So.
And then my other question, just because I know people are going to ask, why did Oregon force you guys to change the packaging?
They didn't want anything that might attract the eye or
Kids or something like that? Yeah, before
So it was
that's
kind of
right.
flashy.
I think
Like those camel cigarettes.
have sugar as like one of the main ingredients.
What?
Yeah,
That's so
you can't
weird.
have candy. So no candy, no anything sweet really. They all have to be like
Granola bars.
Green light.
Oh, by the way,
that.
we're rooting for you guys in the
Rules so
tasty
far, you know, things
shit
may change.
thing.
Oh,
more fat tasty
We're, that sucks.
did they come to Vin to you guys?
Huh?
Did they come to Vin to you?
Yeah.
Really?
Oh, that's not you guys?
Hell no.
See?
Who's
I
there?
swear I thought that was you guys.
I have no
It's
idea. It
fucked up.
got dropped off for me, and then we looked at it and we're like, this is.
You know who that
fucked.
is, right?
I have a feeling I know.
Solution.
Yeah, it's Mike. Yeah. Okay. Wait,
So
I mean,
they've already, our attorneys have already sent them paperwork. So
we're
hopefully
rooting
that'll
for,
go
we're rooting
away.
for you.
But yeah,
That shit's
ridiculous.
fucked.
Ridiculous.
Yeah, I walked
There's a
into
new
a dispensary in
There's a new
Issaquah and I was
cartridge.
like, when did I start putting
exactly
food on the
like
packaging?
the
Yeah, I had no
Font.
idea.
When did we start
Word
using
for word.
flavor
Yeah.
additives?
Exactly.
It's
like
sativa and it's like, yeah. We just switched ours. So like all the new stuff is going to look different, which is good, but people will think that that's still us. So. we're working to get
Wait,
those
so
out.
it's like a different brand, but looks a lot like.
Yeah, but
not a
there's
lot. It's
Kind of, it's like the
identical.
same
Or is
shit
it like
that
they
they use
copy
in that.
it looks like
liquid
they just
nicotine
added. It looks like
flavor. It's the
Open just
same
added
exact same
flavors
stuff.
to their Opens. That's what it looks
Right.
like.
It was a 100% personal attack on us as a business. So,
So it's
a
the
direct
exact copy of the
Exactly.
Open
No,
logo
literally
package. Yeah.
identical font, identical testing
Yeah.
labels. They literally just took an Open
copy.
cartridge,
Words.
How did they think
made
they
it
could get away
sweeter,
with that?
and stuck their
Well,
cartridges in
because
it.
no one until you bring it to litigation, nothing happens. So the funny thing is, I looked up the marketing firm that designed it. You go on their webpage and there's this whole Tasty Vape thing, and it's like, this was so much fun. We had to pull a lot of talent and a lot of creative juices to do this one, and I was like, are you kidding me right now? So I wonder if Mike also wanted
He probably just bought them 3 Opens.
Yeah.
It's pretty funny. Mike hates us.
He hates everybody.
I have a question about the composition of your company.
Yes.
So, I mean, who are you guys? I mean, who are you? If you had to describe yourself, are you a bunch of scientists? Are you a bunch of business people? What are you? Who are you guys? How do you?
Yeah, Derek, I would consider him a scientist. I met this guy in high school. We went to Bainbridge High 10 years ago. I ran into him when I was managing a restaurant. These guys were regulars; they come in all the time. And occasionally I'd have to deliver to the lab, and I'd be like, "Interesting. What do you guys got going on here? Never been in an office like this before." You know, you'd have a group of guys and women sitting around a table smoking joints, Skyping somebody in Europe, and I was like, what is this about? And then they introduced the Open to me, and I said, this is probably the coolest thing I've ever seen. Every person I showed it to said, wow, I want one of these. I said, you guys have a hot ticket item here, and what can I do for you? You know, Hamilton has a computer science background, and he worked for Microsoft. Klaus was a chef, correct?
Yeah.
So Klaus is one of the other owners, he's not here right now. He was making edibles for cancer patients and wanted to be a consistent product to make sure that he wasn't giving them way more in one and way less in another, and went back to the Netherlands, correct?
Yep. And basically
That's where
found the testing stuff and basically imported that from the university there. Started the lab with the guys that were in Amsterdam. Who was just looking for that consistency and learned to be a scientist, and myself as well. Basically learned about the company Canatest when they came from the Netherlands, thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever heard of, and wrote Klaus a letter and say, hey, I'll sweep the floors, whatever, I just want to learn, and give me an internship opportunity, which he did, and was gracious enough to, and let me go out and meet, and I got just event after event, fortunate enough to meet some of the most brilliant scientists from around the world that are in this space and been educated directly by them. So me, I'm a scientist, I'm a businessman, revolutionary. You know, this medical cannabis is a contemporary Copernican revolution. We're trying to convince the world that it's an efficacious plant. And people look at us like we're absolutely insane. What? The world doesn't revolve around the sun? Fuck you.
It might have some.
It's, you know, cannabis is good, and through the testing and the science and things like the Open Vape, where we can actually dose and say, look, this is dosing a molecule in the same way as any other medicine. Like, what else? It's what we do. We get to live and breathe cannabis and love every minute of it.
Well, the word is spreading.
Yes, most definitely.
Well, we appreciate all of you guys' help.
Yes, thank you very much.
Seriously.
It's great to have a whole bunch of
Whenever
passionate people involved.
Yeah, whenever I use an example, it's always have a heart. It's like these guys sell this many. If you guys want to, you can do the same thing. Unless you're nuts.
They can't. They can't do
So
it.
in the vein of contest, you
We can
guys should
try.
give us ideas of what you would want.
Hella free shit.
Yeah, because I don't want to cash prize if you gave out products.
That's all we want.
It'd be easier.
That's all we really want, to be honest.
What about a
I'll sell it.
What about a